Good to see a good number of you here today. This is my last talk for the cruise, as I mentioned it over here. They said don't mention that the cruise is almost over, so I won't. But at any rate, this is my last talk on this sea day. So I'm hoping that tomorrow you'll take advantage of the opportunity that you have to go visit this area around Naples and the area of the great volcano and the eruption there, Pompeii. Now we are sailing this way. I think I read in our program about 8:30 tonight we'll be in this area right here. So you'll get to see where Sicily and the toe, I call this the football, and this is the boot of Italy, the football. We'll come very close into here and we'll be heading up towards Naples. And so that's the area we want to talk about today. Pompeii, of course, is famous and has been famous for many years. It came first really discovered, I guess we might say rediscovered, in the 18th century, 1700s. Early people, as they began digging in this area, they noticed, just as they were doing construction, they began to find things. And that's what brought people's attention to it and their interest to it. And this only grew as more and more people excavated. They would find things, they would bring them home as souvenirs or buy them. In fact, when they used to have the grand tour of Europe that a lot of wealthy people would do, and from England and France and so forth, they would go visit all the sites. Pompeii got included in that as part of going to Italy. And so we're going to see that the great eruption took place here in the greatest one that we talk about. There's been several eruptions. It was in 79 AD. It was in August of 79 AD. It came without much warning. There were some earthquakes. Of course, this area has a lot of earthquakes. But the excavations that then will take place are going to continue on even today. So tomorrow as you go out, you will probably see, if you look carefully, people working at the site. Now there are two main sites that were covered. One is, of course, Pompeii, perhaps the most famous, covered by volcanic ash. And then there's Herculaneum that was actually covered by mud. So here is the Bay of Naples as it appears today. You can see it's a beautiful area. It's a heavily populated area. Naples is a large city, and the whole area around the bay is also heavily populated. This is in fact one of the concerns because Pompeii is still an active volcano. We went to Santorini. You heard my talk about Santorini. That was still an active volcano. There's an active volcano on Naples. And there's one on the island of Stromboli. So there's a few active volcanoes around. Now, it hasn't had this kind of massive eruption, since 79 AD, but there have been lesser ones. We'll talk about those today. So we'll see that so many people live in this area. Part of the problem, and the authorities, the Italian government, I guess, has tried to warn people, but the ground is so rich here because of the volcanic debris, ash, that has formed very rich soils, and so you can grow grapes and olives and all kinds of vegetables and things here. Plus, it's just a beautiful harbor and a beautiful area that many people do not want to leave. But if a massive eruption were to take place at some point, it would be very hard to evacuate so many people from this area. It's Italy's third largest city, Naples. About 4 million people or so live there, and it stands in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, an active volcano. Well, here we can get an idea of the bay. It's the harbor. It's a beautiful harbor, beautiful areas we just saw. Here is the volcano, which you can see, if we go back, you can see it here in the distance. It dominates the area, the skyline, and that's where it is right here. In fact, if you can see it carefully, that's the cone of the volcano right there. Pompeii was located, as you can see, to the south, more to the south, whereas Herculaneum was here more to the west of the volcano itself. And so Pompeii gets covered with ash. Now, of course, associated with a volcanic eruption, there are earthquakes. There's a lot of groundwater, or water spouting up out of the ground. It was started off as steam and then condenses and forms. That's what causes the mud flows that will bury the city of Herculaneum. Consequently, part of the reason I suppose Pompeii is better known is it's been excavated a lot longer, and it's been excavated to a fuller extent, in part because it's easier to excavate. It's volcanic ash, which is a lot softer. And so on a typical tour that they give today, they just maybe don't even take you to, I don't know, I'm guessing now, 25%, 20% of the site itself. Whereas, of course, you could spend days looking around in there, certainly hours, if you had more time and energy. You could wander all around Pompeii. Herculaneum, in fact, if you go visit that one, you'll be on the level of the town, the modern town, and you'll actually see where they've dug down. You'll see the edges of it where they've dug down, and you will have to go down into the city to where it's been excavated. It's been tougher to excavate because it is a different material. The volcano, this is an artist representation of the eruption, just to give you an idea of what it would have looked like. And we see, for example, this is the cone itself, more dramatic shot of it. In fact, I know you can, and I think from the boat here they have available, you could actually go up and visit the top. I've been up there before. They park the buses down here, and you have to walk up here around the edge of it to see what it's like. There's still a little bit of smoke, mist coming out of the middle of it usually. But it is quite a dramatic view from up there. So this is Mount Vesuvius itself. Now, this just shows you the positioning of Herculaneum and Pompeii. And then actually, it's hard to read it here, but these are different lava flows, different eruptions that have happened over the years. Some as recently as in the 1940s, 1939, 1940, then 1950. There really haven't been a really big one in quite a while. But you can see the lava flows coming down. And then here, of course, this was hit by mud, volcanic mud, and a lot of the ash here will show you. Another view of the cone itself, a little bit higher. And this, again, another artistic representation of the city of Pompeii with the volcano erupting in the distance. So if we go to the site itself and take a look at Pompeii, this is sort of a classic picture of it, that as you visit there tomorrow perhaps, you'll be able to see Mount Vesuvius in the background. This is the area near the Forum, or the center of the city. And one of the things that this does for an archaeologist, of course, I always tell people archaeologists are perhaps rather mean people, because we secretly like it when people are destroyed, especially quickly. Like here at Pompeii, because what happens is that since it was such a rapid event, many people were not able to escape. So that means that they've left behind their furniture. I mean, you can even see places, you could see places, where they left bread in the oven, that sort of thing. And the bed frames, or wooden bed frames, have been preserved. And also, what I actually found out when they began to excavate here in more modern times, let's say a little over 100 years ago, late 19th century, as they began to dig down, they would find they would hit a kind of void, a space in the ash, and inside of it they would find bones of people. And so they got the idea that they would take plaster of Paris, they would mix it up, and they would pour it in. When they got to a void like this, they poured it in, and then it would spread in the void. They would let it harden, and then they excavated around it. So you'd actually get the shape of the person, because what these voids were where people died, and they were just covered over by ash. The ash solidified into a soft stone. The bones were still inside, but the opening preserved a sort of what we might call a negative image of the person. So by pouring the plaster in, you filled up the void, and when you excavate around it, you get the image of the person. Now, in more modern times, they've actually done this with acrylics that are clear. They pour them in, sort of like a plastic, and let them harden in there, and then excavate around it. You'll see, you don't really see those on the site. If you get a chance or you're interested, at the museum in Naples, the Archaeology Museum in Naples is really a fascinating museum to go visit, and they have so many things from both Herculaneum and Pompeii. And that's where I've seen those acrylic casts of the acrylic casts that were there. What happened to my picture? There we go. So all of this was then buried in AD 79, like I said, in August. And we know a lot about it, not only because of the archaeology, but we actually have a first-hand written record of the eruption. It was written by a guy by the name of Pliny. And to distinguish, there were two Plinies. There's Pliny the Elder, and, as you might guess, Pliny the Younger. Pliny the Elder was the uncle of Pliny the Younger. And Pliny was so fascinated by this, and of course he wrote many, many works, and he traveled all over the Roman Empire writing Pliny's Natural History. So it's fascinating to read that. But as he was getting a little older, his health wasn't as good. He lived near the Bay of Naples, okay, in a town a little further to the north that escaped destruction. But when he saw what was happening, he just couldn't resist going and writing it down. Okay, so he actually ordered his servants to get his boat ready. He got onto his boat. He was writing as he went. His nephew was with him, Pliny the Younger, and so he went with him. But as they went out, they got very close to the shore. The smoke, the ash, there actually be projectiles coming from the sky. Okay. Different sizes. Some are called volcanic bombs because they're, about maybe baseball size or something like tennis ball size. And then others are smaller, lapilli, little things that would fall. And actually he began to record it. He got back to his home, but he became so ill from this, and he was already in bad health, that he died just a few days later. And it's actually his nephew that writes it all down. You can read about the account, Pliny's account of the eruption. So we have a lot of records of it preserved from the very first century, because he was an eyewitness. They were eyewitnesses to these events. As you go around the city, there's much to see that preserves the everyday life. And what you have to remember is Pompeii was what we might call a wealthier city. I wouldn't call it a typical Roman city, because it's actually, the people who lived there were wealthier. Many of them had moved there because of the weather from Rome and that sort of thing, and they had elaborate homes. For example, most Romans did not have their own private, what we would call single-family dwelling, right? Most Romans lived in apartment buildings, concrete apartment buildings, 4, 5, 6 floors high, and that's the way they lived. And so they had small rectangular apartments that they would live in. The plush houses that you see in Pompeii especially are not typical of the average Roman. But as you walk around, you can see, frozen in time, I guess I would say, after the excavation. For example, here is a restaurant. You walk up from the street, you can see they have counters here. You can see where they would have put probably soup or some other kind of liquids there to be dispensed, with countertops, ovens, fountains. You can see it all. And as you walk through the streets, you'll see the streets, the walking stones across the street. You'll see, you can go into homes. This is the amphitheater. Most people don't make it that far because it's a good hike down there. Most tours don't include it, but it is a very fine amphitheater. If you've been to Rome, or maybe when we land, you'll go into Rome, you'll see the most famous of the amphitheaters, which is the Colosseum, which is called the Flavian amphitheater, actually, but we just tend to call it the Colosseum. That was built about the same time as this eruption. About 2 years later, it was dedicated. But this one, much smaller, but it would have had gladiatorial bouts here and some of those things that are happening. If you get down to that part of the city, you want to walk through and do that. Sometimes people try to reenact being gladiators. So if you've got some people in your group, have one of them come out of this opening, the other one out of this one, they could meet in the middle. You could film the whole thing. I don't think there's any lions or animals you could use, but you could fight each other. Very carefully, of course. You don't want to get too hurt. But that's at Pompeii.